Okay, so when you think about the Texas Revolution, what's the first thing that pops into your head? It's the Alamo, right? Of course. But here's the thing. The story of that legendary last stand doesn't start with a defeat. Nope. It actually begins with a string of incredible and kind of forgotten victories that set the whole stage. So let's dive into how this revolution really caught fire, long before anyone ever thought to remember the Alamo.
We're about to see how a whole series of early, decisive battles created this powerful and, as it turns out, really dangerous sense of momentum for the Texan rebels. And the whole thing kicked off with an argument over one little piece of artillery.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's the fall of 1835 in a little town called Gonzales. You've got these American settlers on one side and the Mexican government, now run by the dictator Santa Anna, on the other. And tensions, well, they were about to explode. So Santa Anna decides he's going to centralize his power, and that means taking away any weapons from the local provinces. His first stop in Texas? Gonzales. And his target? A single, tiny cannon that the settlers had been given years earlier to defend themselves from Native American raids. The Mexican commander shows up, probably thinking this is going to be an easy job. But the Texans, they flat out refused. And they didn't just say no. They sent riders out to all the nearby settlements to gather reinforcements. And right there, you see the first real spark of a unified volunteer army. I mean, talk about drawing a line in the sand. On October 2nd, 1835, the rebels actually charged the Mexican camp and sent them running. This little fight over one cannon, it became the first official shot of the Texas Revolution. Okay, so with the Mexican army retreating from Gonzales, the newly formed First Army of Texas Volunteers, led by Stephen F. Austin, knew they couldn't just stop and celebrate. They had this incredible, unexpected win, and they had to keep that pressure on. And boy, did that momentum build fast. Right after Gonzales, the rebels march over and capture a whole Mexican fort at Goliad, grabbing a ton of vital weapons and supplies. So now, with 2 victories in their pocket, they start looking at the biggest prize in all of Texas, San Antonio. And you gotta understand, these weren't just military wins, they were huge psychological victories. All of a sudden, the idea of actually winning independence didn't seem like some crazy dream. This ragtag bunch of farmers and settlers was actually beating a professional army.
All right, so now they're aiming for the big one, San Antonio de Bexar. This was the most important political and military hub in Texas. And get this, it was commanded by General Martin Perfecto de Cos, who just so happened to be Santa Anna's own brother-in-law.
But see, this is where things start to get complicated. The siege just drags on for a month and a half. And yeah, there were some small victories here and there, but the Texan army was getting indecisive. Supplies were running low, winter was on its way, and that revolutionary fire they had, it started to fade. By the time early December rolled around, it honestly looked like it was over. The leadership had lost its nerve. They were pretty much ready to pack up and go home until spring. It really seemed like all that incredible momentum was about to be lost for good. But just as everything seemed to be falling apart, one man, a kind of cranky but very respected settler named Ben Milam, he just refused to give up. He knew that if they hesitated now, the revolution was dead.
So he strolls into the camp, and he doesn't give some long, fancy speech. He just makes a simple, passionate plea. He challenges the volunteers to risk it all right then and there in a direct assault on the city. And that moment, it changed everything.
The response was just electric. Inspired by his sheer guts, 300 men stepped forward, ready to follow him straight into San Antonio. The attack was back on. The battle was absolutely brutal. We're talking street to street, house to house fighting. On the third day, Ben Milam himself was killed by a sniper. But instead of breaking their spirit, his death just fueled their determination. They kept pushing General Cos's forces back and back until he was trapped inside a fortified old mission. Yep, the Alamo. Outnumbered and outfought, Cos had no choice but to surrender. So you can imagine the scene, right? The Texans threw a massive party. They had done what everyone thought was impossible. In just a couple of months, their volunteer army had captured San Antonio and kicked the entire Mexican army out of Texas.
So, under the terms of surrender, Cos and his men were disarmed and sent packing. The Texan rebels were now in control of the most strategic spot in the whole territory. Their confidence was through the roof. They felt totally invincible. And that, right there, was the problem.
See, not everyone saw this huge win in the same way. The very symbol of their success, that fortress called the Alamo, would very quickly become the center of a huge disagreement that was about to change the course of history.
And this captures the conflict perfectly. On one hand, you have the soldiers who fought and bled for the Alamo. To them, it was their greatest prize. But on the other hand, their commander, General Sam Houston, saw it for what it was, a deadly trap. He argued it was way too far from the other Texan towns and was basically impossible to defend.
Houston's orders were crystal clear. Blow up the Alamo and take the cannons with you. But the men on the ground, who were still celebrating this incredible victory, they just disobeyed. They couldn't bring themselves to destroy the symbol of their greatest triumph. That one act of defiance, an act born from all the success they'd had at Gonzales and Goliad and San Antonio, well, it set the stage for one of the most famous and bloody sieges in American history. It just goes to show you that sometimes your greatest triumph can plant the seeds of your greatest tragedy.